It seems even when there is good news, baseball finds a way to put it in the mud and muck it up. And of course, it has to do with the Hall of Fame and steroids. Here on the Sports Cubicle, we love baseball, but it seems to me that every single time baseball is a main subject on the show, it is for something dumb or something bad. And here to talk all about it are baseball lovers, Chicago baseball lovers, and Major League Baseball lovers. It is Devin Tingle. It is the marvelous one, Dan Marver. Of course, Paul Chivari, and myself, Mike Mercado. The one and only Paul Chivari, our local baseball expert, the Baseball Weekend Journal. The best thing to do on the weekend, you get your cup of coffee and listen to Paul break down baseball. Paulie, the Hall of Fame vote happened. One person gets in. And while it's a beloved figure in baseball, it opened a whole can of worms. Your thoughts on the Hall of Fame voting?
Well, for starters, the person that got inducted was David Ortiz, Big Papi, 3-time World Series winner with the Boston Red Sox, media icon, lampooned on Saturday Night Live by Kenan Thompson, a cultural figure for sure. Did he take PEDs? Well, we don't know for sure. I believe he was named on the Mitchell report, but there was never any definite tie-in. I think it was just a suspicion of. And then there was an anonymous test that the league conducted with no punishments, just to kind of get an idea of just how many people were using performance enhancers. But it was later revealed on the New York Times that Ortiz's name was on that list. Now, did that mean that he took steroids? No, all it means is that he took what the league deemed a banned substance, and what Ortiz believes he took was something that was over the counter. And even Commissioner Rob Manfred had said years later that it's unfortunate that he got named because it could have been something that was very innocent. This wasn't a real PED test of the league actually trying to crack down on players. This was the league trying to get just a random testing to see what they're dealing with here, which later helped formulate what their policy would be years down the road. But unfortunately, this year was the 10th and final year that Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Sammy Sosa, and we'll throw in Curt Schilling as well in there, even though I don't think there's PED suspicions, all of them being on their 10th and final year of the ballot, since they didn't clear 75% of the returned ballots being approved for the Hall of Fame. They're now off the list, and now they have to wait until the Today's Era Committee, which actually coincidentally meets later this year during the winter meetings, to determine if these guys should get in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they would even be considered in that vote. They would have to wait another, I think, 3 or 4 years before that committee meets again to discuss their era of baseball. Now, it's unfortunate because Barry Bonds is the all-time leader in home runs. Why wouldn't he be in the Hall of Fame if you didn't know what was his backstory? To go along with the fact that the all-time hit king, Pete Rose, still isn't in the Hall of Fame if you didn't know his backstory. And then now you add Roger Clemens, who has the most Cy Young awards, which is the best pitcher in the league every season, at least for the leagues that he was in, the American League. And then I don't think he won one with the Astros in the National League, but still 7 Cy Youngs, and he's not in. So what kind of Hall of Fame can we really say that this is if there aren't the best players in it? Well, the writers, who are the ones that determine this, felt the need that the moral obligation to keep the Hall clean. There's a clear rule when Pete Rose played saying that he shouldn't gamble. He was caught gambling on baseball games, therefore he's not in. There wasn't really a firm rule about performance enhancers, though, in the era that Bonds, Clemens, Schilling, and Sosa all played in. Unfortunately, though, towards the end of their careers, that's when the league started trying to crack down on it. By this point, these guys had already kind of ballooned up in size, were putting up inflated numbers, and really were keeping the cash cow of baseball going in the post-1994 strike era. So while my stance has softened on PED users making the Hall of Fame, I really do think we need to measure that era. If the game's counted, we really do need to seriously consider some of these players. But I think at the same time, some of those romantic ties that we have to certain numbers, like 500 home runs or 3,000 hits, some of those mile markers that writers used in the past to make sure people got into the Hall of Fame, I think we have to reconsider some of those numbers because the game had changed in the steroid era and beyond. And so now maybe someone like Sammy Sosa, who's one of the few people to be in the 600 home run club, maybe it's not impressive when he was leading the league in strikeouts so many times. But with Barry Bonds, 762 home runs is more than what Hank Aaron hit. But maybe we have to kind of put in some sort of, at least, some sort of coefficient that corrects that and maybe shows that maybe he's somewhere in between Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, or Babe Ruth and Hank Aaron, in terms of what the real number should be. That's still impressive. And I think we really should take a harder look at some of these guys for the numbers that they did put up in that era compared to the rest of the league. But of course, we were saying, Mike, how baseball always finds a way. And this time it was the writers, because why would someone like Ortiz get in? And I know it's different than the Bonds and Clemens situation, but why would Ortiz get in and Bonds and Clemens were nearly on 75% of the vote and they don't get in? And I thought this year, it seemed like their numbers dropped off compared to the previous ballot. I thought for sure that this was going to be the year that we saw at least one of those two get in.
Paulie, our recent and current and active baseball expert. Check out all the work at Baseball Weekend Journal. I want to move to our local and the Sports Cubicle's baseball historian, Marver. Marver, you see these names that didn't get in. You see all the reasons why they possibly didn't get in. Your thoughts on the fact that a museum won't put all the facts out there, in my opinion, on some of these guys not getting in. And the one who did get in, David Ortiz.
Well, I probably have a stronger opinion than anybody, having seen probably more baseball than some of you. But the thing is, Ortiz is worthy. But first of all, I think they should change the voting. I think Pete Rose should be in. I saw him play. He's one of the greatest players of all time. And I know that he did something wrong, and he was punished for that within the rules of baseball. But he shouldn't be out of the Hall of Fame, and neither should Barry Bonds. And I mean, when they were playing, if what they were doing was so bad, why weren't they suspended for years? That's my question. That should be the punishment if they were found to do something wrong. And that never happened to Bonds, did it? So therefore, he completed his career. And even if, he played more games than Aaron probably, because they had longer, even the whole argument with Aaron is he played more games than Ruth, So, if you do the averaging out, maybe they're all about equal. But the point being is that the Hall of Fame should have the best players, and the best players are not in the Hall of Fame. And I think that's ridiculous.
The passionate, marvelous one who's seen a lot of baseball. Devin, the youngest baseball fan here, your thoughts on the results of the Hall of Fame?
I'm the youngest and I'm almost 30, but as I've been telling you guys, this is like these are my idols here. AJ Pierzynski got 0.5% of the votes, guys. And all AJ Hall of Fame worthy, definitely, I'm shocked by some guys like Alex Rodriguez not make it, and Mark Burley was 5%. But I mean, it is kind of weird because I saw guys, Bonds, Sosa, Clemens, in the older of their career, obviously. And as I've been talking with Paul on Baseball Weekend Journal and the Sports Cubicle before, is my big gripe is there's always been a form of cheating here. Like, there's guys that have done PEDs and steroids that are in the Hall of Fame. Mickey Mantle admitted taking pills that had him run faster. And I've always said, do you think Babe Ruth had nearly as many home runs as guys like Satchel Paige were able to play in the MLB back in the day? Probably not. And some people might argue that's a bit different, but I'm like, there's always kind of been a form of cheating here. I'm not saying confirmed cheating is right here, but, Bonds, Clemens, Sosa, all these guys, they got caught. That's really what it is here. For all we know, there's a new thing that people are doing in the MLB that could be the next cheating scandal down the road here. I side with Marver. Yes, guys like Barry Bonds and Clemens should definitely be in the Hall of Fame here. And just to play devil's advocate, there's always been that form of cheating, as I've been saying here. But, this is different story. I'm talking on my you-know-what here.
Go ahead. No, please continue.
Just what I'm saying here, it's different. Trying to say, we got to move with the era here. If you want to put the asterisk next to people's name in the Hall of Fame, that's fine. But I don't think that's needed here. I think at this point, like Paul's saying, for years, the number of home runs, your batting average, that was all the way to do it. But as Marver said, the seasons have gotten longer. It's like each year when he broke the hit streak, it's like, yeah, but you had way more games than before. So, I mean, the game's always evolving. There's always changing. And yeah, I'm kind of, comparing apples and oranges here. But, to go and just be like, oh, they did steroids. It's like, I think Jose Canseco's in the Hall of Fame. Didn't he write a whole book about doing steroids?
He's not in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I thought he was. I'm sorry.
But it goes
he
right.
Did. Yeah, you're right. Really, Canseco, though, kind of should be immortalized for what he did with the book, because I think he was the first person to really call real attention to it. Granted, it was to sell books, but I think he was really stating of don't let these guys fool you. The majority of the league. I think he was saying 80% of the league at the time was on steroids, including calling out his former teammate in Oakland, Mark McGwire, who has a more legitimate case to be in the Hall of Fame, and especially for what he did. the league rode on the backs of Sosa and McGuire in the home run chase, yet these guys aren't going to be in their Hall of Fame. And Marver's right about the rules need to be changed in terms of it's what's keeping them out, at least Rose, is the ineligible list. Other than that, all the PED users are up to the writers. And then it's going to take some time for a veterans committee, but they need to make sure that when these veterans committees meet, there needs to be guys like, Frank Thomas and Larry Walker, and the guys that did make it into the Hall of Fame that played with these guys should be on that. And I know they usually do keep a couple of Hall of Famers from that, but I'd like to hear more of people that played in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to really give their thoughts on, who should get in from their era. Because it really is a shame that the hit king, the home run king, and the all-time Cy Young award winner king is not, are all not in there. But perhaps I think if you had, some of their peers, you'd get a true opinion of how they feel about it. Because supposedly Thomas, Walker, Bagwell, those guys didn't do steroids, or at least they weren't, there weren't accusations, thrown at them all the time. So, I think we got to take it out of the hands of the voters and kind of take this moral backbone, code out of it, because it's just such a weird gray area that the league didn't do a good job of policing, and all the records aren't expunged. We can't vacate the entire 2 decades that all these guys were jacked up. So I think we have to take a hard look at what their numbers are, but examine them compared to its own era, not compared to, other eras like, the dead ball era or the golden years,
We could do this all day. We want to know your thoughts over on Twitter at Sports Cubicle TV. I, for one, am sick and tired of talking about a museum that has holier-than-thou baseball writers deciding what people who play the sports and put up great numbers decide who goes into this Lifetime Achievement Award. That they said it's different when you complain about Mina Kimes and like Jeff Garcia did and was a complete ass of himself about it. That is commentary. That is evaluation. What we're talking now is Hall of Fame voting and somebody's life work being denied because somebody in Boston, who we don't ever question their credentials on why they should be voting into the Hall of Fame, are doing it and denying people. Let us know your thoughts. It is Devin Tingle. It is Paul Chivari. It is the marvelous one, Dan Marver. I'm Mike Mercado.